Welcome, viewers, to a new episode. Let's get started.
The first thing Martha Cole noticed about the mountain man was not his size or his silence, but the empty space beside him. It was there at the tiny station platform, just past the hitching rail, where the other brides had stood before her. The ones who'd ridden up the mountain and come back down in less than a week, pale and tight-lipped, refusing to speak about what they'd seen in his cabin or in his eyes. Martha stepped off the stagecoach with the creak of strained springs, her carpetbag clutched in both hands. Every head at the station turned toward her the way they always did. First with surprise at how much there was of her, then with that quick flicker of judgment people tried to hide. She had learned long ago to keep her chin high and her shoulders square, no matter where their eyes went. "Miss Cole?" the man asked. He stood alone under the shade of a leaning pine, taller than she'd imagined, shoulders broad beneath a worn wool coat. His beard was trimmed short, his hair tied back with a leather thong. Not wild, like she'd been told, just watchful. "Yes," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Martha Cole, you must be Mr. Reddick." "Jonah," he said. He didn't offer a smile, only a brief nod. "You travel well?" "Well enough," Martha said. She had crossed 3 states by train, then 2 days by coach. Well enough was the only answer left to her. A pause settled between them, thick as dust. Behind her, someone at the station muttered, "We'll see how long this one lasts," followed by a sharp laugh that cut off when Jonah glanced over. He heard that too, Martha thought. Good. What she didn't know yet was whether he cared. But they rode out of town in near silence, Jonah at the front of the buckboard, Martha beside him with her bag on her lap. The town of Gray Fork shrank behind them. A few false front stores, a church steeple, a saloon that pretended not to watch every stranger. Martha kept her hands folded tightly, feeling the boards of the wagon bite into her hips with each jolt. "What did they tell you about me?" Jonah asked at last. Martha looked straight ahead at the ribbon of road climbing toward the dark line of pines. "They said you live alone, that you send for brides and send them back." "I don't send them," he said quietly. "They ask to leave." "Why?" she asked. He twitched the reins, though the horses didn't need it. "You'll see the place soon enough." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but then, yet she hadn't expected easy answers from a man who lived where maps turned to blank space. Martha's fingers tightened on her skirt. What she wanted was simple to name and hard to hold. A place that was hers. Somewhere people didn't lower their voices and say things like, "Poor thing, she missed her chance," when they thought she couldn't hear. In St. Louis, a clerk had slid the advertisement across the counter without meeting her eyes. "Mail order matches," he'd said, as if the words tasted strange. Widowers, homesteaders, ranchers, men who needed wives more than they needed refinement. Martha had read Jonah Reddick's letter twice before writing back. He hadn't complimented her or made promises. He had written, "I live high in the Timberline Range. It is not an easy place. I need a wife who understands hard work and quiet." So she understood both. People always mistook her size for laziness. They didn't know how many stairs she'd climbed, how many ledgers she'd balanced in the back of her uncle's boarding house, how often she'd swallowed her own retorts until they sat like stones in her chest. "Why did you answer?" Jonah asked as the wagon began the long climb into the trees. "Because I was tired," Martha said. He glanced at her then, brow faintly furrowed. "Tired of what?" "Of rooms that belong to other people," she said. "Of being told I take up too much space, and yet somehow not enough." Another silence. Different this time. Not empty, just full of things not yet said. The road narrowed, the air cooling as they climbed. Pines pressed close on either side, needles whispering above them. Once they passed a narrow path leading off into the trees. An old iron signpost stood bent beside it, the letters worn by weather. Martha opened her mouth to ask, but Jonah clicked to the horses, and the moment passed. She caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, measuring perhaps whether this one would bolt at the first strange noise or lonely night. "Did they all leave because of the same thing?" she asked. Jonah's jaw worked. "More or less." "That's not an answer," Martha said. "It's the only one I have for now." He was stubborn. Good. She was too. By the time they reached the ridge, the sun had dipped low, throwing long shadows across the valley below. Jonah's homestead came into view around a curve in the road. First the roof, then the stone chimney, then the whole cabin tucked into a clearing like it had grown there. Smoke drifted from the chimney in a thin line. A split-rail fence ringed a small corral. Beyond it, the land fell away in a steep, dizzying drop to the river far below. Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was beautiful in a rough, uncompromising way. "It's higher than I pictured," she said. "It's safer up here," he replied. "From what?" Jonah set the brake and jumped down before answering. He offered a hand to help her, and she took it, feeling the calluses on his palm. For a heartbeat their eyes met, and there was something there she couldn't name. Weariness, perhaps, or guilt. Inside, the cabin was neat, but spare. A wide table, 2 chairs, an iron stove, shelves lined with jars. A second doorway, curtained, led to what must be the sleeping room. No lace, no frills, nothing that had belonged to another woman and been left behind. You're the fourth," Jonah said suddenly as he set her bag near the wall. Martha turned to face him. "Fourth what?" "Fourth woman to come up this road, answering my letter." He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "None stayed more than a week." "And did you tell them why?" she asked. "I tried," he said. "Not sure I found the right words." Martha studied him. His shoulders were tense, as if braced for something, an accusation, a question, a carriage turning back down the road. She could almost see the ghosts of the others, their footsteps still worn into the floor. "Then try again," she said quietly. "With me." He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked past her toward the small window and the darkening trees beyond. "There are things about this place you won't like," Jonah said. "About me you might not like. I won't blame you if you leave." Martha felt the old familiar sting rise in her chest, the assumption that she would run, that someone like her did not choose, only accepted what was left. She thought of the whispers at the boarding house, the tight smiles, the way her aunt had patted her hand and said, "Be grateful for any offer, dear." Up here, no one had offered anything. She had claimed it. "Mr. Reddick," she said, straightening. "I did not come all this way to be treated like a passing guest. This is my marriage, too." He looked back at her then, really looked, as if seeing beyond the dress that pulled at the seams and the soft roundness everyone else saw first. "And if you don't like what you learn?" he asked. Martha glanced toward the window, where the last light bled out of the sky, leaving the clearing wrapped in blue shadow. The air in the cabin smelled of pine smoke and iron and something else. Loneliness, maybe. Expectation. "Then I will decide for myself whether I stay or go," she said. "But I won't be running before I've even unpacked." Jonah's throat worked, an unreadable flicker crossing his face. He stepped away from the table, reached for a lantern, and lit it. The warm glow pushed back the dimness, making the cabin feel smaller, closer. "There's something I need to show you in the morning," he said. "Down past the old signpost you saw on the way up." Martha felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "What is it?" He hesitated, fingers tightening briefly around the lantern handle. "Ask me again tomorrow," Jonah said, "after you've slept." And with that, he turned toward the curtained doorway, leaving Martha standing in the center of the cabin, a stranger on the edge of a life she had claimed but did not yet understand, wondering what waited beyond that crooked sign in the trees, and whether she was truly ready to face the thing that had driven 3 women back down the mountain before her. Martha woke to the sound of an axe. For a moment she did not remember where she was. The rafters above her were rough-hewn, a dark against the pale morning light slipping through a crack in the shutters. The mattress under her was firm but clean, the blanket smelling faintly of smoke and pine. Not the narrow iron bed from the boarding house, not the city, the mountain. She swung her legs over the side, the floorboards cool under her feet. Her dress from the day before hung on a peg, brushed out, the dust shaken from the hem. Someone had taken the time while she slept. Through the door, she saw the main room. The table, the stove, the empty space where Jonah had stood the night before. The axe thudded again, steady and measured. She moved to the small window and pushed the shutter wider. He was in the yard, sleeves rolled to his elbows, splitting logs with a practiced rhythm. Each swing was precise, not wasted. Wood chipped away in clean halves, but there was a stillness in him, even when he moved, like a man listening for something only he could hear. Martha watched a moment longer than she meant to, then pulled back, annoyed with herself. She dressed, adjusted the buttons that always pulled a little too tight, and tied her hair as neatly as she could without a proper mirror. When she stepped outside, the air cut through her like cold water, sharp and clean, full of resin and distant river. Jonah glanced up, then set the axe aside. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. "You didn't wake me." "Figured you were owed at least one good sleep," he said. Long road. There was coffee already on the stove, biscuits wrapped in a cloth, a pan still warm. He had moved quietly, she realized, because he'd grown used to being alone. A thoughtless noise was a habit of people who assumed someone would always be there. Over breakfast, the silence between them felt less like a wall and more like something they were both examining from opposite sides. "You said there was something I needed to see," Martha reminded him, as she broke a biscuit in half. Jonah's gaze shifted to the small window again, toward the trees she couldn't see from here. "Down past the old signpost," he said. "Best we go before the sun climbs much higher. Snow softens the ground on the far slope this time of year." "Is it dangerous?" she asked. "Depends how you walk," he said. "I won't take you anywhere I can't bring you back from." It wasn't a comforting answer, but it was honest. He saddled a horse for himself and brought out a stout little mare for her, with kind eyes and a barrel chest not unlike her own. "She'll carry you sure-footed," Jonah said. "Name's Clover." Martha ran a hand along the mare's neck. The horse leaned into the touch without hesitation. "You chose well," she murmured. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You can tell a lot about people by how they treat what has to carry them," he said. The trail down from the cabin was narrow, crusted with old snow, where the trees kept the light away. Martha's thighs burned by the time they reached the bend with the bent iron signpost. Up close, she could make out the faded letters: River Path, and beneath that, Slope Grave. She frowned. Grave? Jonah swung down from his saddle, boots crunching in the thin ice. "This way," he said. They left the horses tied to a low branch and continued on foot. The path narrowed further, slanting along the side of the ridge. Martha watched where she put each step, aware of the drop to her left and the way the ground shifted under loose stones. Her breath came harder than she wanted it to, but she kept her pace even. "You all right?" Jonah asked once. "I told you," she said, voice clipped. "I knew there'd be climbing." He let it rest. The trees opened into a small clearing tucked against the slope. There, under the shadow of a broken pine, stood 3 markers made from rough-cut planks, the names carved by hand. Ella Reddick, Thomas Reddick, James Reddick. Martha's step faltered. "Your family," she said softly. "My brother," Jonah said. "His wife. Their boy." The boards were weathered but careful. Someone had sanded the edges, oiled the wood, come back more than once. At the foot of each marker lay a small stone, a white against the dark earth. "What happened?" she asked. He crouched beside the nearest grave, brushing away a thin crust of snow with the back of his hand. For a moment, his face was turned away, and she saw the line of his shoulders, the way they bowed not from work, but from something heavier. "They came up here when the fever took hold down in town," he said. "Thought the air would be better for the boy. I'd been working this place a few years by then, knew the paths, knew the weather. Or thought I did." Martha waited. The wind moved through the pines, a low sigh. "It rained," he went on. "Harder than I'd ever seen for this early in the year. Loose stone on the far slope gave way in the night. House they were staying in was closer to that edge than it should have been." His jaw tightened. "I heard it start. By the time I got there, it was over." He didn't describe the scene. He didn't have to. The rawness in his voice filled in more than words could. "The town blamed you," Martha guessed quietly. "Some did," Jonah said. "Said I'd brought them up where they had no business being. Said the mountain was trying to keep what it had taken. Others just stopped looking me in the eye." He wiped his palm on his trouser leg, as if to rid himself of the memory. "Maybe they were right. I stayed anyway." "Why?" she asked. He stood and faced her, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Because this is where they are," he said simply. "And because leaving would have felt like running. From them. From my part in it. I work the land. I keep the markers clear. That's what I know how to do." Martha looked at the 3 names again. It's the boy's age. It must have been 10, maybe 11, from the smallness of the script. She swallowed. "And the brides?" she asked. "What does this have to do with them?" Jonah's gaze drifted past her, toward the slope where the ground fell away. "First woman they sent was named Claire," he said. "I brought her down here on the 2nd morning, same as you. Told her about the slide. Told her folks in town thought the place was cursed, or I was." His mouth twisted. "She went quiet as we walked back. Packed her things before supper. Said she couldn't raise children in a place that took them." "And the others?" Martha said. "Second one, Lydia. Heard about it from Claire's letters before she even came," he said. "Made the trip anyway. Lasted 4 days. Kept waking up at every creak in the night. Started talking about bad omens, and about how a man who stayed this close to graves must like being alone." He shook his head. "Third, Annette. She tried hardest. Stayed 6 days. Tried to pretend she didn't mind coming down here with me to bring flowers, but you could see it in her eyes. She wasn't seeing what I see." "What do you see?" Martha asked. Jonah glanced at the markers again, then back at her. "People I loved," he said, "and my share of the blame. That's all." Martha pulled her shawl closer against a sudden chill that came from more than the air. She could imagine the others, standing where she stood now, hearing the same story. She could imagine how it must have sounded told by a man with rough hands and a reputation for living where maps ran thin. "You bring every bride down here," she said slowly. "Right away." "Yes. To give her a chance to run before she feels too tied to this place." He didn't deny it. "Seems to me," Martha went on, "you're doing the leaving first and calling it kindness." Jonah blinked, as if she'd struck too close to something he hadn't expected her to touch. "I don't want anyone staying here out of ignorance," he said. "Maybe you don't want anyone staying at all," she replied. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, tugging it loose from its pins. She smoothed it back with fingers that were steadier than she felt. Her heart thudded in her chest, but not from the climb now, but from the weight of choice that hovered between them. "You've heard what there is to hear," Jonah said at last. "If you want to go back down with the next supply wagon, I'll hitch it myself. No hard words, no hold on you." The old anger rose in her, slow and familiar. The anger of being considered surplus, an extra chair at someone else's table, easy to move aside. "You look at me," Martha said, "and you already see me leaving." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "That's what's always happened," he admitted. "Because you made certain it did," she said. For a long moment, the only sounds were the creak of trees and the distant rush of the river far below. Jonah's hands curled at his sides, then slowly relaxed. "If you stay," he said carefully, "you'll hear things in town. Some folks still think anyone who comes up here is asking for trouble. They might not serve you, might not speak kind to you. Town folks haven't been speaking kind to me for a long time," Martha said. "And yet here I stand." He studied her, really studied her, as if weighing something that had nothing to do with her size or her city clothes. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "I'm afraid of many things," she said. "I'm just more afraid of living a life chosen for me by other people's stories." His gaze held hers for a heartbeat that felt like a crossing. "Then you should know," he said quietly. "This graveyard isn't the only reason the town whispers about this place." Martha's throat tightened. "What else, then?" He hesitated, jaw working. Yet, and for the first time, she saw not just guilt in his expression, but something like protectiveness. "There's someone else on this mountain," he said. "Someone they don't want up here. Someone they think I should have handed over years ago." "Handed over to whom?" she asked, unease pricking at the back of her neck. Jonah looked up the slope, toward a line of darker trees where the shadows pooled thicker. "Ask me again tonight," he said, "when you've seen how they look at us in town." Before she could press him further, he turned back toward the path, leaving her with the graves at her feet, the river's murmur in her ears, and a new, sharper question settling beside the old ones. Who else, besides 2 living strangers and 3 quiet markers, they called this mountain home? And why did the town want them gone badly enough that every bride before her had chosen to walk away rather than share whatever burden Jonah Reddick was carrying alone? Martha understood what Jonah had meant about how they look at us before she even stepped off the wagon. Gray Fork was the same town she'd ridden through 2 days before, but it felt different with Jonah at her side. Conversation slowed as they pulled in. A man sweeping in front of the general store leaned on his broom and watched them like they were a storm cloud rolling in from the wrong direction. A woman at the pump pulled her little boy closer when they passed. "Thought he'd quit bringing 'em up there," someone muttered near the livery. "4th one," another voice answered. "She'll be back inside a week. And if the mountain doesn't take her first." Martha kept her back straight, and her hands calm in her lap. She had learned long ago, if you could not stop people from staring, you could at least choose how you stood under their eyes. Inside the general store, the air smelled of coffee, leather, and dust. Shelves rose high on either side, crowded with sacks and tins and folded calico. Jonah walked to the counter, nodding once at the man behind it. "Morning, Al," he said. "Need flour, beans, kerosene, nails if you've got 'em." Al Bonner was a narrow man with a tidy mustache and a ledger always within reach. He glanced at Jonah, then at Martha, then back again, his eyes lingering on her the way a man measured an overloaded wagon. "So it's true," Al said. "Well, you went and fetched another one." Martha's fingers curled around the string of her reticule. Another one, as if she were a crate of goods ordered and returned. "Orders paid in full," Jonah said evenly. "Same as always." "Oh, I don't doubt your money, Reddick," Al replied. He began to scoop beans without looking down, his gaze still fixed on Jonah. "Just wonder what you tell him up there. About the graves. About other things." He let the last words drop like stones. Martha stepped forward before Jonah could answer. "Mr. Bonner, is there something you'd like to say plain?" she asked. "I've come a long way. I'd rather not play at half-spoken warnings." Al's brows shot up, unused to being addressed so directly by a stranger, much less by a woman who didn't shrink under scrutiny. "Well," he said, tightening his mouth, "since you ask plain, folks in town don't take kindly to a man hiding what he's hiding up there. That mountain's got blood in the rock, and he keeps it close. Sister, brother, that poor boy, and now the crazy one." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. "Crazy one?" Martha repeated. Al hesitated, perhaps realizing he'd said more than he meant to. "Girl," he said at last. "Wild as a fox. Runaway. Should have been handed over to the sheriff or sent east, proper. Instead, he keeps her up there in the pines like some secret. Folks don't like it. Don't like him." Martha felt Jonah go very still beside her. "You done?" Jonah asked quietly. Al snorted and reached for the kerosene tin. "Just saying your bride ought to know what she's marrying into. Course, maybe she don't care, as long as there's a roof to fit under." Heat pricked the back of Martha's neck. "Mr. Bonner," she said, her voice steady, "I care very much what I marry into. That's why I ask questions, but I choose who I listen to. And if you're aiming to warn me, you might start by learning my name." Silence fell for a heartbeat. Someone at the back coughed. "What is it then?" Al said grudgingly. "Martha Reddick," she replied. The word felt like a stone set into place. "For now, that will do." She felt Jonah's glance like a touch on her shoulder. When they left with their supplies, the whispers followed them out to the street, but no one said her name. Not yet. They rode in silence most of the way back up the mountain. The road climbed and curved. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair. "How much of that was true?" Martha asked at last. Jonah's hands tightened on the reins. "Enough," he said. "You said there was someone else on this mountain. Someone they wanted gone." "Didn't figure you'd hear it from Bonner's mouth before mine," he muttered. "That doesn't answer me," she said. "Who is she?" He exhaled, the sound more like surrender than annoyance. "You'll meet her soon enough," he said. "Better it be on my porch than through their stories." By the time they reached the cabin, clouds were gathering along the far peaks, heavy with the promise of late snow. Jonah unloaded the wagon in practiced motions. Martha carried what she could inside, her mind turning over every word from town. Once the door shut behind them, the quiet of the cabin felt different. Not empty, attentive. There were details she hadn't noticed before. A second coat hanging on a peg near the back door. Too small for Jonah. Too long for a child. 2 mugs by the stove, one chipped. A pair of boots tucked neatly under the table, laces tied in careful knots. "You didn't bring me to an empty house," Martha said. Jonah set the sack of flour down with more care than strictly needed. "No," he said. "I didn't." "Call her out," Martha said. "I'd rather meet her standing up than have her watching from behind a curtain." He looked at her for a long, measuring moment, then raised his voice, not loud, but clear. "Liza," he said, "you can come out now." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the curtain that led to the small room near the back shifted, and a young woman stepped through. She was perhaps 16 or 17, set with dark hair cut blunt at her shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a man's shirt belted at the waist and a skirt that had been let out and hemmed again. Her bare feet were silent on the floorboards. She stayed near the doorway, chin lifted, jaw set. "So," she said, "they sent another one." Her gaze flicked over Martha, quick and cool, taking in every curve, every seam. Martha recognized that look. It was the gaze of someone who'd had to read a room fast to see where the blows might come from. "This is Martha," Jonah said. "Martha, this is Eliza Harper. Liza." "Not Reddick?" Martha asked lightly. "Not yet," Liza said, something like challenge in her tone. "I keep my own name." Martha felt an odd urge to smile. "As you should," she said. Liza's eyes narrowed, as if that answer didn't fit the pattern she expected. Tell her," Martha said to Jonah. "Not just what she is to you, but what she is to them." Jonah rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "Her father ran with a bad lot," he said. "Took money, took cattle, took more than his share of foolish chances. One night, he and his men hit a storage barn in town. There was a fight. Lantern got kicked. Fire took half the grain stores. A man died trying to put it out." He paused. Liza's shoulders had gone rigid. "Sheriff tracked him up into the foothills," Jonah went on. "Most ran. Liza's ma caught a stray bullet. I found her on the trail." His voice roughened. "She asked me to bring Liza somewhere the law couldn't reach just to punish her for his sins." "They wanted to send me east," Liza cut in, her voice sharp. "To one of those houses where they lock up girls like stolen horses. Put you to work till your hands bleed, then put you out again when you're used up. I'd rather take my chances with rock and snow." "They wanted to make an example," Jonah said, "of her, of anyone who helped her." "So you hid her," Martha said. "I gave her a roof," he said. "Taught her the paths. We keep to ourselves. Town keeps its distance, except for their talk. They don't like that I wrote for a wife while she's here. Makes them think there's something uglier going on than a man trying to build a life that isn't empty." The bluntness of it hung in the air. Martha felt the sting of how easily their story could be twisted into something base. "You didn't put any of that in your letter," she said quietly. "Would you have come if I had?" he asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Honesty demanded more than a quick answer. "I don't know," she said at last. "But the choice should have been mine to make, not something I discover by accident or gossip." Jonah's jaw worked. "You're right," he said. "I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was protecting myself from watching one more person turn back down that road before they'd even seen what kind of life we could make here." Liza shifted, arms folded tight across her chest. "You don't have to stay," she said to Martha. There was no disdain in it, only resignation. None of the others did. They saw a graveyard and a stray, and decided they'd rather have a house in town with a man who wasn't already full of ghosts. Martha looked at her. Really looked. At the hard set of her mouth covering a fear older than her years. At the way she stood half-angled toward the door, ready to bolt. "I know what it is to be looked at and seen wrong," Martha said. "To have people decide what you are before you open your mouth. I won't do that to you." Liza blinked, a flicker of something unguarded passing over her face. "And as for staying," Martha went on, turning back to Jonah, "I haven't spent half my life being told there isn't a place for me, just to walk away the first time things are bigger and messier than I was promised." Jonah's voice was very quiet when he asked, "You mean to stay then?" Her heart beat hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. She thought of the boarding house stairs, the narrow bed, the way people had always spoken of her life like a lantern burning low, nearly out. "Yes," Martha said. "If I stay, it will be with my eyes open. To your graves, to your ghosts, to your stray." She looked at Liza. "What all of it?" Before Jonah could answer, the distant crunch of hooves on hard ground cut through the room. All three of them went still. "Riders," Liza murmured. "4, maybe 5. Jonah moved to the window, lifting the corner of the curtain. "Town men," he said. "Sheriff's with them. And Bonner." He reached for the shotgun on the wall, checking the chamber with practiced hands. Martha's stomach dipped, but there was no wild panic in his movements, just grim readiness. "I won't let them take her," he said. Martha stepped between him and the door. "You think they rode all this way not expecting you to bristle?" she asked. "A gun at the door is the story they already tell. Let's not hand it to them polished." He stared at her, surprise warring with habit. Then he nodded once, slow, and set the shotgun back in its bracket within reach, but not in his hands. They stepped out onto the porch together. The riders were already at the fence line, Sheriff Lane in his worn badge, Al Bonner at his side, a couple of ranch hands Martha recognized from town. "Afternoon, Reddick," the sheriff called. His gaze slid to Martha. "Ma'am." "Sheriff," Jonah said, "you're a far way up from your usual rounds." "Word travels fast down in Gray Fork," Lane said. "Heard you got yourself a new wife." His jaw tightened. "Figured it was time to settle some old business before you drag anyone else into it." "This your idea of settling?" Jonah asked mildly, nodding toward the men flanking him. Lane shifted in his saddle. "Town's been patient with you," he said, "but harboring a fugitive is one thing. But building a whole household around it is another. Folks are uneasy. They want the girl turned over." Martha felt Liza's presence just behind her, tense as a bowstring. "Girl has a name," Martha said. "And there is no law, last I checked, against her living on a mountain instead of in a town that spit on her." Bonner snorted. "You don't know what you're talking about, miss. This ain't your fight." Martha stepped down off the porch, boots crunching in the thin crust of frost. She stopped at the fence, so they had to look down to speak to her. "I came up this mountain of my own choosing," she said. "I married this man of my own choosing. That makes whatever concerns this house my fight." The sheriff studied her with a frown, as if recalculating. "You sure you understand who you've tied yourself to?" he asked. "Tian man lost his kin up here, and then took in the daughter of the man who burned half this town's winter stores. Folks have long memories." "So do I," Martha said. "I remember every time someone decided my life for me with a few whispered words." She took a breath. The cold air burned her lungs, but it steadied her. "If you've come with a warrant, Sheriff, show it," she said. "If not, then what you're asking is for us to hand over a girl who's done you no harm, just so your neighbors can sleep easier, telling themselves they've punished someone for the past. That isn't law. That's fear." A muscle jumped in Lane's cheek. Bonner flushed an ugly red. One of the ranch hands shifted, uncomfortable. "You think you can stand against a whole town?" Bonner snapped. "Big woman like you ought to know when to move aside." The words struck home, as they were meant to. Martha felt them land and sink, and then slide off, finding no purchase where they once had. "I've been moved aside my whole life," she said calmly. Funny thing about putting someone on the edges. They get a good view of how foolish the middle can look. She rested her hands lightly on the top rail of the fence. "I won't leave this mountain because you're uncomfortable with what lives on it. And I won't let you drag a frightened girl down there to make your stories feel tidy." For a long, taut moment, the only sound was the horse's breathing and the faint rustle of the pines. Lane looked from her to Jonah, then past them to the cabin door, where he could almost certainly make out the shadow of Liza's figure. "Law don't say where she has to lay her head," he said slowly. "Town's got opinions. Law's got limits." He shifted his gaze back to Bonner. "We came up to talk, Al, not to drag anybody off their land without cause." Bonner stared at him. "So that's it? We ride up, we ride back down, and the mountain keeps what it took?" Lane's eyes hardened. "Mountain took plenty from him already," he said, nodding toward Jonah. "'Less you've forgotten who pulled your boy out of that creek last spring when the bridge gave way." Color drained from Bonner's face. The sheriff tipped his hat to Martha. "Ma'am, your choice is made, sounds like." "It is," she said. Lane turned his horse. One by one, the others followed, hooves crunching away down the trail. Bonner glanced back once, something sour and complicated in his expression, then kicked his horse into a trot. The silence they left behind was different from the one that had preceded them. Not empty, not entirely safe, but claimed. Martha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and turned back toward the porch. Jonah was watching her as if he'd just seen the shape of his own house for the first time. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. That's why it matters that I did." Liza stepped out onto the porch, arms still folded, but her eyes looked less like storm clouds and more like something breaking after a long winter. "You really mean to stay?" she said. Martha climbed the steps, feeling them creak under her weight, solid and sure. "I really mean to stay," she answered. "But I won't stay as a ghost. My name will be on this door, same as his. Yours too, if you want it." Liza's throat worked. "What if they come back?" she whispered. Martha glanced toward the bent iron signpost, visible just beyond the edge of the clearing, its letters faded and half lost to rust. "Then they'll find us still here," she said. "Working, eating, arguing over who burns the biscuits. Living." Jonah's hand brushed hers, a brief, hesitant contact, as if he wasn't yet sure he had the right. And she laced her fingers through his, steady and unhurried. For the first time since she'd stepped off the stagecoach, Martha felt the shape of her own life settle around her like a well-sewn dress. Not perfect, not finished, but made to her measure. Down in Gray Fork, they would talk. They would call her foolish, stubborn, blind. They would say no mail-order bride could last a week with the mountain man. Up here, under the watch of the pines and the quiet graves and the wary girl at her side, Martha decided their stories no longer had the final word. She was not the woman who couldn't find a place. She was the one who refused to leave it.